What would you do if you had something rapidly plopping towards you at roughly 60 miles per hour, which comes out to 96 kilometers per hour? If you said imbibe ethanol to the point of intoxication in order to make it allergic to you, then you are today's winner of the ADHD Olympics, because I have no clue how you would even put that together. On a small island off the mainland of Ireland, something would touch down in the ocean that would begin first harassing the native whale population before moving on to dry land to attack the small town and begin eating the citizens. However, through the experience of one man named Patty, it would become apparent that the alien was never really ready for what humanity does to their own bodies, despite it literally being a toxin and doctors everywhere saying to stop do that. But then again, you gotta ask yourself, what do those giant nerds know? Anyhow, this creature grew, more would begin popping up as it would attempt to then track those down in order to get a foothold on this new world. In today's episode, we will talk about the monster from the movie Grabbers, its morphology, as well as its glaring weakness, which is just absolutely hilarious. That doesn't mean, however, that it can't just fling you several miles away from where you first stood in front of it. But first, this episode is sponsored by Raycon. Are you ready to blast music utilizing earbuds with comfortable customized gel tips straight into your ear holes? Well, you better be, because using the link in the description right now or heading to buyraycon.com/Roanoke, you can get 15% off your purchase today. With its noise isolation fit, but also in awareness mode, you can hear what's going on around you, or you can just completely tune out the teenager in the gym squatting the bar and yelling because reasons. Plus, with 3 sound profiles of pure sound for perfect vocal clarity, balanced sound, great for a variety of genres, and bass sound, which boosts the bass, there's a profile for literally everyone. And with summer basically upon us once more, we all know we're gonna be around pools a lot, and with that, none of us are really graceful. Either that or it's just me. With these water-resistant earbuds surviving being left outside in the rain or dropped in a pool or puddle accidentally and then retrieved, you can pop them back in and continue listening to your music. Mine have actually survived a few washing machine adventures, so that's been pretty great. But all with its 32-hour battery life, 8 hours of continuous playtime at half the price of other premium audio brands, it's really no wonder that Raycon has got 49,000 5-star reviews. So if you'd like to scoop yourself up a pair today, head over to the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/Roanoke to get 15% off your order. All right, let's get back to it. All right, so everyone knows the drill by now, but if you haven't seen this movie, I don't know how this got past my radar, but it was pretty hilarious. So if you want to watch it first, I'd highly recommend it. If you want to bypass the summary, there's a timestamp up on screen to move to the science portion. For all others, let's get to why when you see someone pulled up into the sky in the dead of night, your first instinct shouldn't be to just follow them out there and see what grabbed them. So we start off our story over Earth, as you do, as something enters Earth's atmosphere, landing near Ireland, but in the ocean. A man is currently mopping the poop deck, and that is what I assume is the poop deck. I really have no idea. As he hears something, he looks up and spots the meteorite coming down near them. A little while later, the trawler is responding to an unknown distress flare, but they literally just saw it land in the ocean, unless this was a secondary boat, but I didn't see a secondary boat. So it was definitely the meteorite. That's not a distress flare. I'm not really sure how wires got crossed there. Anyways, they radio back to the Coast Guard before the captain yells out to the man asking if he sees anything. Just then the man spots something under the water and is pulled overboard as the captain runs out there to check on him. As the captain looks on, he too gets hit through the chest and then pulled in. So let me ask you this, you've just seen 2 people get pulled into the water. Why at this point would your first instinct not to be to, I don't know, barricade yourself in the captain's nest? Well, man number 3 decides he's got a better chance than the other 2 and then runs out there. To mess around is human, to find out is divine. As he hears squelching, he looks up and is immediately got by something unseen. So now we meet Garda O'Shea and Garda Sealbon, but that was really just to make you angry. It's actually just O'Shea and Nolan. We see O'Shea is feeling a lot like how I was feeling this past Sunday morning after hanging out the in-laws, and Garda Nola, we'll just really call her Lisa, is arriving on the ferry. As O'Shea goes to pick her up, they're off to a good start. Man, I'll tell you, Ireland seems pretty scenic, but as a man and his dog walk down to the coast, things turn bad pretty quickly. Looking out, he spots a pod of whales all washed up on the beach, which, as you might guess, is a bit strange. Heading into headquarters, Lisa meets with what I assume to be the captain. He's going out of town for like 2 weeks, so Lisa's there to help assist O'Shea with policing the island. O'Shea complains about it, but it's clear the captain does not have much faith in him. We now meet our man Patty. As he goes to check his lobster traps, he has something that he's not really sure what it is. Calling over his friend, the guy looks at it and then is immediately sprayed by a liquid, which that's a total bummer. And O'Shea and Lisa talk about how she was stationed in Dublin, and she brings up how it's always the quiet places where the crazy stuff happens. And have you seen the crazies? It's true. Heading out to the beach, the Garda has been called about the pod of whales that have washed up on shore. Dr. Smith is already out there getting samples as he meets Lisa and seems rather interested in her. Lisa asks why they have wounds, to which Smith replies it's probably because they all died out at sea for some reason, but it's definitely a mystery, and then they just kind of hit the rocks on their way in to account for the wounds. But the ocean is a harsh mistress, so who knows what's out there? Hopefully not something capable of rapidly plopping. Okay, so there's this part where O'Shea asks Lisa, using his hand, what's that? To which she has no idea, and then he just turns it over, he's like, it's a dead one of those. And It's just really fundamentally it's a bad joke, but I would implore you to use that on someone because it's way funnier when you actually get to do it. I used it on my wife, she didn't get it, I loved it. Meanwhile, Patty has now grabbed the creature in the lobster trap and brought it to the bathtub. O'Shea and Lisa now go to Daly and Cooney's to employ them and their crew to clean up the whale carcasses. As they finish up for the day, Daly goes back to grab the shovels before spotting spherical objects in the sand. As he goes to return to his crew, he is grabbed by something and then dragged back into the ocean. Cooney gets tired of waiting on him and then goes to check on him, but realizes he's pretty much AWOL. We now learn that Lisa is staying at the pub. Bartenders attempt to hype him up, but he's actually still just pretty depressed. Meanwhile, Patty is staring at O'Shea. O'Shea asks him what he wants, and he begins telling him about the sea monster he caught today, and it's in his bathtub. Later that night, as it rains, Todd is sleeping in his chair, and he's hearing a knocking noise at the door and yells for Irene to go get it, but she's not dressed. As he goes to check, I swear, the Irish just have like the way with words. It's Cooney, and he yells back to Irene that he's pissed as a fart, and I will absolutely be using that on my friends who, imbibe. He's just sort of like banging into the door. He's being held up by his hands, which I'm not sure how you wouldn't notice the monster tentacles doing that, but eventually drops him as he is clearly checked out of this mortal coil. Todd goes to check on him, but then is dragged upwards into the sky as Irene runs inside and closes the doors. Eventually though, she hears it coming down the chimney, and as she goes to close the flue, she is pulled up and then taken out. Meanwhile, back at the pub, O'Shea goes to shoot his shot 2022. He asks Lisa to come down and have a drink, to which she declines, saying that he's drunk. Patty now returns home to deal with the sea monster and finds it escaped and left an egg. Looking into the corner of the room, he spots Hermaeus Mora as it shoots its tongue out and tries to bite him before attracting it quickly. It then attacks Patty, but he's able to stomp it out. The next morning, the bartender tells Lisa about O'Shea and talks about how he's a widower and how a storm is due in. She then tries to get her to change rooms, for the bigger bed and whatnot, as Lisa then heads into work. She had brought O'Shea to the station to sleep it off as she couldn't actually end up finding his house. She then gets a call from Dr. Smith and Patty for his findings. Patty calls them grabbers as, they just kind of grab you. Everyone says hi to Lisa for some reason, and she asks about the grabber. They aren't sure if the thing is dead or not until Patty whacks it. I guess you could call that a patty whack, pulling out its tongue and then spits out like a frog and then sucks the blood out of an animal that it comes across. Thus, that's what they surmise what the tongue looks like. It appears the creature can live solely off water and blood, making it incredibly adapted to Earth's biosphere. Dr. Smith also surmises at this point that it's a she, as he also found that the creature was pregnant. As O'Shea and Lisa then drive around, he spots Cooney's car down in the beach, which, as you might imagine, is a little strange, especially since they're really not supposed to be down there. They go and check out Todd's house as they spot all the lights are on and the roof has been messed up. Lisa climbs up a ladder to figure out what happened and spots some tattered clothing. She recognizes the smell of the creature and then begins pulling on the clothes as it's stuck on something. Eventually, O'Shea gets a headbutt from Todd. The doctor says that he must have been mauled by some sort of animal, maybe like a tiger, as Patty shows up to talk about the creature as it destroyed his bathtub. Lisa is confused though, as the creature needs water to survive, and Patty mentions how it rained that night, and when it rains, there is no dry land. With a storm coming in that night, that potentially means that this creature could ransack the entire island. They figure out it must be in Black Rock Caves, so when the tide is out, they go to check on it. O'Shea and Lisa enter the cave looking for the thing as they get all the way to the back before finding a fisherman's jacket from the lost boat earlier. Meanwhile, Patty has located more of the eggs in the sand. As he goes to remove the sand, he then realizes these things are basically on the verge of hatching. O'Shea now calls out to the fisherman before turning around and spotting the thing is like literally right there with them. Lisa and O'Shea hightail it out of there before O'Shea turns and says it can't get through, it's too big. And of course it shoots its tongue out at him, which inspires all three of them to take off. Remember, never turn around and look at the thing that you're running from assuming it can't get you, because that's exactly when it gets you. O'Shea calls the Coast Guard, which apparently they know of him unfavorably, and say the Coast Guard boats have been called back due to the storm that's headed their way. Lisa and O'Shea now head to the lab to burn the creature with gas and fire. Dr. Smith attempts to tell them to stop, but they don't listen. As they light it up, it activates the fire suppression system, which, you guessed it, gets everything wet. They approach it with a chair, a pocket knife, and a rolled up magazine, and then Patty just straight nopes up out of there. Shockingly, the creature goes for the man with the magazine and begins attacking him after squirting him. Now it becomes an attempt to get this thing off of his face. As it begins biting into his face and drinking his blood, they're able to pull it off as it spits out his blood, and they all go and try to stomp the thing out. But these things are actually like extremely durable, and the dead space levels of stomping have to continue. As I talk about how Patty survived if it took two people to get that thing off of O'Shea, they ask how he even survived. Dr. Smith suggests it didn't like his blood very much, so what did he have that day previous? A banana, some chips, and literally Viking levels of ethanol. They now devise a plan. As long as everyone is hammered, they can survive until tomorrow morning when the Coast Guard shows up. So they need to have a lock-in at the pub. They inform the bartender of what is happening, and by the way, his name is Brian, and what's going on, what they need to do. They then convene and try to figure out how blasted they need to get for the night, and decide that Lisa is the fittest and doesn't drink at all, so they can use her blood alcohol content to see at what level the creature is affected. infected. O'Shea elects to stay sober to keep an eye on everything while this is going on. Lisa disagrees, but he knows the island, so his plan is to be the DD. So as she's knocking them back like a college freshman at a fraternity party in July, they realize that Patty also has some special brew as well. He pours her some as she chugs it, and that's what sends her over the edge. They give her a blood test as the creature drinks the blood and begins rattling the cage. It appears to go into anaphylactic shock and then starts foaming at the mouth. They test Lisa's blood alcohol level and she blows a 0.2, which if you didn't know, that means 20% of her blood is essentially alcohol. That's really high, like dangerously high. As night begins to fall, O'Shea and Lisa head to the church to get everyone together for the shindig at the bar. Everyone's a little confused, but as soon as they mention it'll be a free bar, everyone is immediately down to go party as the storm begins rolling in. Basically, as soon as the thing starts, everyone is, as the Irish say, pissed as a fart, while the group in the back of the bar puts together every counter that they have for this thing. The bartender brings a super soaker, suggesting that they should fill it with petrol, which is a smart man. So as Lisa and O'Shea share a moment in the car, but he's sober, she's hammered, he ends up turning her down, at least for now, because that's what Chads do. But considering everyone is drinking a diuretic, eventually you're gonna have people that have to pee. Dr. Smith heads to the back and then tries some of Patty's home brew, while Dr. Gleason goes to the bathroom. It's closed, so then he just heads outside to go pee. Now the issue with being inebriated is it lowers your ability to really care, as Patty just straight up lets Dr. Gleason go outside to pee. Lisa then talks about how O'Shea's wife bit the dust, but as it turns out, the bartender's wife was really just trying to hook them up because O'Shea's wife just met someone else, so they just ended up splitting. Meanwhile, back outside, something is approaching Dr. Gleason. It's a bunch of younglings squaring up on him. It attacks him, but because they're so small, they're able to free Gleason from the hug of death as Lisa goes around smacking them with a golf club. At this point, they turn around and spot Big Daddy coming to check on the kids. It grabs Gleason and pulls him over before squaring over his head and then pulling off his head. Whoa. So technically if that happens quick enough, you would still be somewhat conscious, though in complete shock, I imagine. That's gotta be a nightmare. O'Shea and Lisa then run to the police cruiser, which does the car and the horror movie thing and won't start. Lisa attempts to arrest the creature as they turn on the police sirens and lights, which distracts the creature as it absolutely shreks the car later. We then get this absolutely ridiculous moment considering they are all in the same room, which made me laugh. Brian starts just running in screaming for the lighter, but Smith is absolutely schlackered. Eventually he is able to crawl over and light the candle for the super soaker in this like creation of Adam scene as Brian then goes out to fight the creature. Of course, upon getting out there, he nopes out and runs back inside. Drunk planning, there ain't nothing like it. They now realize that they're out of beer unless someone goes outside and changes the keg, which at this point O'Shea realizes that they need to move the party upstairs as just a precaution. As people attempt to go home, this causes Patty to tell Brian to chill or he'll give himself a angina. Lisa spills the beans that everything is under control and nobody is trying to take them out, which then kind of alerts everybody, but Smith yells that they need more ethanol and then goes outside to get a picture of the creature. Drunkenly stumbling along, he does eventually come face to squid mouth with it and gets several pictures. As O'Shea yells for him to come back inside, Smith continues to stand there as it uses a tentacle on his head, realizing he's completely unappetizing. Smith starts talking about how it's just an animal and then gets flicked off into the distance. I mean, I don't even know how far that was, maybe like half a mile, but he's completely hammered, so who knows? Maybe he survived just going completely limp. Heading back inside, everyone just saw that thing outside the window and the children begin breaking into the bar. O'Shea barricades the door and attempts to just wait it out. O'Shea tells everyone that as long as you're inebriated, you are safe from the aliens. But as they wait there, they realize the Big Daddy creature has a sheep that it's basically flinging against the door. It's a mating ritual, as the male has followed the scent of the female juices sprayed on O'Shea earlier, which is exactly why it went after Todd after getting sprayed in the face as well. Which means now this thing is trying to mount O'Shea somehow, and in its frustrations will likely end up ripping him limb from limb. That's a terrible way to go. As Brian checks his alcohol levels, they are already beginning to sober up, and good lord, like that's a crazy quick sobering process. Patty suggests throwing a concussive force detonator, which Brian then asks, does he have it on him? But apparently, like, Patty answers that he doesn't have it, like, on him. And I think somebody needs to go check Patty's house to see what he's doing over there. O'Shea comes up with an idea. They need to dry the creature out to get it to stop. They will use the grabber to grab the grabber and lift it into the air and let the sun dry it out in the morning. Lisa volunteers to go there and get Brian's truck. Lisa now descends into the grabber young area before nailing one to the bar top and then kicking another into the jukebox. O'Shea and the rest of the group make a decoy of himself as Lisa goes and grabs the keys, lighter, and Patty's brew as tentacles then start entering the kitchen. Walking through, she gets grabbed, which causes her to accidentally light the bar on fire, but she's able to free herself from the creatures as everyone realizes that the fire is spreading. O'Shea now escapes out the window as Lisa pulls up with the truck. He jumps in before the creature can grab him, and now we get like the rapid plopping as this thing Beyblades its way after the truck. Like literally, that was the subtitle. It was ridiculous. But getting to Daly's dig site, they can't figure out how to get the crane going as O'Shea makes a run for it with the creature giving chase. He jumps onto a central platform, but is stuck there as the creature squares up. He takes aim with the flare gun, pointing it at the barrel of gas as the creature shoots out its tongue and then then pulls him to the ground, injuring his, I believe, femur. The creature then begins descending as Lisa shows up with a bulldozer and knocks it into the pit, pinning it with its weight. As Lisa goes to climb out, the creature grabs O'Shea as she hands him Patty's brew, and it turns out that Gleason's plan was actually right all along. He pours Patty's brew down the throat of the creature as O'Shea is then thrown upwards. Lisa then grabs the flare and fires it into the gas canisters, blowing up the creature. As day breaks, the bar is saved. Brian and Patty go in for another drink as Lisa and O'Shea walk back to town. O'Shea throws his flask away as O'Shea then tells Lisa that he wants her to stay, which she then agrees to do. As they keep limping along home, O'Shea suggests that they need to go pick up Gleason's dog as well, since he's basically just ahead now. And as we sweep over the sea, oh yeah, the eggs they're gonna hatch. Well, they're about to hatch, so the adventure is about to begin again. And that, my friends, is why you don't stop for breakfast when there's more aliens to subdue. So I believe the first place we should start is the life cycle of these creatures, because they actually appear to have similar cycles on Earth, or at least similar organisms exist to them, and how this tells us something about where they may have come from, and then move on to what is causing their interaction between the human blood mixed with alcohol, why it's affecting the grabber in such a horrendous way. So obviously the first stage of the life cycle is the egg, meaning that the creature is oviparous. However, the egg hatching appears determinate on the cycles of water, which may have told us something about its life cycle originally. Now, the eggs need to come into contact with water in order to properly hatch, but that creature intentionally chooses land in which to lay the eggs on, which is an interesting idea considering what it needs to survive. But again, this tells us about its home planet. Shallow oceans may have been something that were fairly common. Getting a look at what we would call a newly hatched stage, these creatures actually bear a striking resemblance to a sea anemone in terms of how they look, with the lower, smoother portions of their body attached to the sea floor and the tendrils up top. What is interesting is if you didn't know, sea anemones are actually predatory and will eat animals that they come into contact with by releasing toxins to subdue the animal. In fact, there's actually some that are known to literally be lethal to humans. So you'll notice throughout these stages of the life cycle that they appear to all take on the form of similar animals down here on Earth, but still remain as the same species, indicating a metamorphosis at some point may be taking place in these creatures as they go from the larval stage to the adolescent, because there are some major changes between the larval and adolescent stages. The adolescent stage is where the tentacles and tendrils have begun forming, which makes them just a smaller version of an adult. Now, the metamorphosis that I'm referring to would have to be in between these stages to actually properly work, because of how much they do change. Now, do they really just melt down and become something completely different? Highly doubtable, but they do change enough. But anyhow, the adolescent that Patty was able to grab and keep in his bathtub is interesting for a few reasons. Because we know the larger one is male and the smaller ones are females, this could be some form of sexual dimorphism concerning the sizes of these creatures, but I think I'd be more inclined to believe that the smaller ones, while female and laying eggs, are just younger than the larger one. Regardless, what's strange is there's no indication that the one in the lobster trap had come into contact with the male at any point, although his ability to find her based on her juices that she puts out means really at any point she may have been found. So this raises the question, do they reproduce asexually, or was there sexual reproduction? I honestly really can't tell, because I don't know if the male came into contact with a female at some point prior to being trapped in that lobster trap. But during this adolescent stage, this is where they will gain the ability to use their tongue as a firing barb in order to suck the blood out of the targets. The larval stage, they can really only grab onto your face as humans are too large, but they appear to be able to still suck blood from you to a degree from the mouth and face of the chosen target. With the adolescents though, this barb allows them to pierce the skin and suck the blood. That way, as when O'Shea was attacked by this creature in the lab in a forced makeout session, which is something you never want to do with the bloodsucker, it was able to pierce some portions of his face and then get to the blood. But during the adolescent stage, it appears maturity is mostly achieved, and really the only thing left is the indeterminate growth. Indeterminate growth is something a lot of animals on this planet, like snakes, amphibians, lizards, and a lot of fish like grouper, are able to achieve. But basically what it means is they can get as large as the environment allows and will continue to grow as they age, never really stopping as long as they have the resources in which to draw from. This may really be the only difference between the larger one and the smaller females. While being male may have its roots in being larger as to compete for mates, the females are just younger and newly hatched. Which, by the way, we don't even really know if this thing is male, female, or anything, because after all, they're aliens. So it could just be both male and female. I mean, even Nemo's dad will turn into his mom given enough time as the dominant male, which is, if you didn't know, that's actually what clownfish do. The dominant male will eventually become a female, and nature is absolutely bizarre sometimes. Anyhow, the final stage is the larger one. As they continue to grow and consume things like whale's blood or fishermen or Dr. Gleason, this will allow them to eventually reach a size where, like with Dr. Gleason, an entire head can be popped off like opening a Coke bottle to get to all that blood inside as the creature continues to feast on the entire circulatory system. This results in a creature that really, the best way to describe it is Hermaeus Mora from Skyrim. A collection of tentacles all over its body with a central mouth, much like that of a cephalopods on Earth, which may indicate at some point the creature will actually leave the shallow seas of its home planet in order to go to deeper portions portions of the ocean in order to find food to eat. Basically, the adolescent stage gives them the ability to skewer animals and suck the blood out of them, while the larger adult stage will give them the ability to completely consume organisms whole with the twisting method that we see on Gleason, which probably just ends up twisting the body to the point of squeezing out blood and then removing the head, which is a pretty gruesome way to go. The creature does not have any eyes to speak of, at least from what we can see, which indicates that potentially this is not a planet that receives a lot of light. Instead, it appears to follow its sense of smell and could even potentially have chemoreceptors within its skin, which does two things. First, in times where it may be a dry environment sort of deal, these chemoreceptors would shut the creature's movement down in order to conserve nutrition. Once water is detected, this will revive the creature from what is basically a self-induced stasis in order to hunt for blood. The other ability chemoreceptors would allow for, as long as the skin is wet, this facilitates the ability of chemicals in the air to bond with the skin better by creating a medium in which the chemical can actually sit in to be absorbed. When this happens, any chemical in the air, like the juices the female releases, the creature can literally feel its location based on where the scent is coming from. Think of it like super smelling, but with your skin. Because of this, the creature can track from the winds, as well as figure out where prey may be based on a different scent that bonds with the chemoreceptors. Once the prey has been found, the central mouth will pull back its protected bony coverings, which appear to operate like teeth and swallow, say, like a human whole, twisting them apart inside. But this life cycle does tell us a little bit about where it comes from and the potential climate of that world. First things first, this creature would have likely evolved on a mostly water planet, but with pockets of dry land, likely much like Earth had hundreds of millions of years ago, and the land had not yet been colonized with animal life and instead was likely rather barren with no real reason for anything to go up on land. However, the species that adapts to niches is the one that can usually end up thriving. At some point in the evolutionary history of this creature, it would have gone up on land much like a tetrapod did on Earth, where it may have been able to adapt in a lot of the same ways. We know on Earth, cephalopods, for instance, will do this from time to time. In fact, it's a well-known issue that octopi will regularly escape and become escape artists from their tanks due to their intelligence and will crawl across the floor after escaping their tanks to neighboring enclosures. I can't remember the aquarium, but there's actually a fish tank nearby to the octopus tank, and they kept going missing regularly until they checked the cameras and realized the octopus was leaving its tank at night, going over to the fish tank, eating a few of them, returning back to its tank before the morning crew arrived, which is just absolutely crazy. Basically, cephalopods can be highly intelligent if you didn't know, and they can survive outside of water for a little while too. This creature would likely do the same thing considering it's fairly similar to a cephalopod of its world. Ascending to the surface and onto land, it would have ended up changing them almost the way of amphibians. So the generalized thinking is fish need water. I know this is groundbreaking scientific content that you show up for. Then over time, the skin of the fish would change, with the amphibians needing both water and land, until eventually reptiles came about, and then moving fully onto land, then mammals and humans, and so on and so forth. But consider the grabbers to be an amphibian stage of this process, likely an early amphibian stage. So back to the planet. With some land, this would allow them a degree to exist on Earth the same way, as long as it was raining and their skin was wet. This stasis could be avoided because, if you didn't know, amphibians also process oxygen through their damp skin. So if the skin is dry, it decreases their ability to breathe, although their lungs still do actually play a role in breathing, but dry skin can lead to the destruction of the amphibian. And considering what a grabber is doing on land, it has a metabolism, so it must still breathe a similar oxygen content that Earth has. But because of this means that there may also be, or must also be, weather patterns that are fairly consistent, which allows the creature to move up on dry land. Because obviously, dry land that is not colonized with life would keep creatures that were young safe from other animals that may be able to eat them. Within the oceans, this is pretty much a huge problem, which, if this water planet had very little land, or is believed to be so, this would mean it's possible that storm systems exist almost constantly at certain points in the year, as there would not be much land to slow it down or rain itself out. The planet would likely have a vast shallow sea in a lot of ways that early Earth did, and even actually later Earth, with tiny islands really being all you could find. These seas would provide the perfect place for the larval stage to hunt, as they would likely be protected from the larger predators in deeper waters. After exiting the safety of the dry land by being awoken by possibly either seasonal storms or shifts in tide, and growing large enough, their tentacles would eventually form. And then they would move on to the next area of the planet, which was the deep ocean, where they would then contend with larger predators and prey, being no stranger to latching onto whales and lacerating their skin to suck out the blood. Just remember, the ocean is nightmare fuel. But all this is to say, though, I don't believe this hypothesized planet would be like a tropical paradise. I also believe that it may have a very slow orbital period around the sun, but also a highly elliptical one that may have been its undoing. When the planet was closer to the sun, this would obviously warm up the planet considerably, creating the hypothesized storms as more energy was added to the atmosphere and the planet was heated up. This would be a triggering event of the mating for the grabber species, which then they would go onto dry land, lay the eggs, and return back to the water. However, as the planet swung back out, things would begin begin to cool. The ocean would turn colder until the top would freeze over, and likely the shallow seas would freeze completely as well. When this happened, any adults in the area or adolescents would go into like a stasis as liquid water turned to ice, which alerted their chemoreceptors. It was basically time to enter hibernation until the water thawed once more, because it's no longer liquid water bathing their skin, but just ice. Now, due to this elliptical orbit, this would cause a very predictable pattern concerning spawning seasons, thawing, storms, and refreezing, likely creating something of a frenzy. But swinging that far out also creates other issues. Asteroid belts are very common in star systems. Luckily, we have Jupiter, which essentially safeguards Earth from most asteroid strikes, but not every planet would be so lucky. Swinging that far out may have put this planet near or even going through an asteroid belt, which ultimately resulted in the planet being struck. Now, it's hard to know if this was a planet-ending event or really just liken it to the one that hit our planet 65 million years ago. But what could be known is that this must have contained enough energy to likely blast a chunk of frozen ocean out into space with the creature still encased in that ice, and then drifted through space until finally it hit Earth. But you might be asking yourself, how is that possible? Well, did you know that amphibians will regularly freeze and then thaw back out once it's warm again? They're able to do this by increasing the glucose content in their cells to stop damage from destroying the cells. Basically, the cytoplasm won't freeze properly or won't freeze jaggedly if there's a ton of glucose in it. This effectively means that really, I guess you could say it kills them, but the thaw back out is what kind of revives the cells and then returns them to life as more energy is added. The same, I would wager, could be said for the grabbers. Once energy was added, they simply thawed back out and continued doing what they would do, probably unaware that they had drifted through space on a magnesium-fueled ice chunk, which it's magnesium because it burns green, which also, what's interesting is Neptune and Uranus may need to be classified as water worlds, as they may literally be holding a ton of liquid water with just a crust of magnesium over it. So anyways, once landing in the warmer waters, well, relatively warmer waters, after all, it's the Irish Sea, of Earth, they were able to snap back like they would on their regular planet. With their morphology and potential origins covered, the last thing we need to talk about is how they get absolutely destroyed by ethanol. Now, it's clear they have a compatible biology to some degree with Earth life when it comes to drinking blood. They have all the necessary enzymes and mechanisms in place in order to process the blood as nutritional and add that into their own bodies to keep them alive. However, unlike on their planet, it appears ethanol is quite foreign to them, and that's likely because vegetation has not made its way up onto land yet and has not produced sugars in order to fuel its survival or attract animals. On Earth, there is an example of all types of animals drinking besides humans. If I remember correctly, in Africa, there are fruiting trees that will drop the fruit on the ground and animals will wait to eat it until it has started to undergo the process of fermentation. I remember watching a documentary where there were monkeys in a tree and they were eating it, having a great time. Elephants showed up, ate the same fruit. I think a boar did too, and it was clear the animals were just absolutely hammered. What was even funnier is they all woke up the next morning and the monkeys behaved very similarly to humans who were hungover. But because of the fruiting bodies and the regular process of fermentation on this planet, animals needed to develop a way that if they ate fruit past its prime, they needed to be able to survive a possible intoxication event, even though we just use it for fun now. Enter alcohol dehydrogenase, or ADH for short. This enzyme is responsible for helping to metabolize and process ethanol as your liver converts the ethanol to acetaldehyde, which unfortunately can cause cell damage. And then aldehyde dehydrogenase 2 comes in, or ALDH2, which converts the acetaldehyde to acetic acid, or basically vinegar, which is non-toxic. And that's how your body deals with alcohol. Now, everything working together is pretty great in humans because imbibing ethanol and having it broken down means you get to borrow fun from the following day. Doesn't mean you should, but everyone makes their own choices in life, myself included. However, even in our own species, this method can get screwed with. It is known in East Asian countries like China, Japan, and the Koreas that at some point the gene responsible for this enzyme was mutated and rendered essentially defunct. Bear in mind, this is known to happen with all ethnic groups. Really doesn't matter where you're from on this planet to have some of this in the running, but in East Asia, it's highly more prevalent. This causes the person with a defunct gene to not be able to process alcohol as well, which leads to a flushing of the skin, itchiness, rashes, and basically what we would call an allergic reaction, all because the enzyme is missing or altered in some way. This has actually led to East Asian cultures to not really drink that much, but for someone who does, it increases the risk of cancer as the body isn't able to properly process ethanol, as after all, it is a toxin. This is what I believe is happening within this creature. Because the land is likely barren or vegetation that may have sprouted up produces no fruits, as there are no animals to take the fruit anywhere, this species never had to develop an enzyme to break down alcohol. Because of this, their body coming into contact with it in any way would inspire a massive allergic response, resulting in shock, foaming in the mouth, and subsequently the shutdown of their body if a high enough ratio of it was able to disrupt the other chemical reactions of life. As humans, we just happen to store alcohol in our bloodstream while it is being broken down, which just so happens to be exactly what the creature wants to drink. So without ADH, their bodies are massively susceptible to the toxic effects of ethanol, as their entire entire immune system would release inflammatory chemicals, shutting their breathing mechanisms down, leading to their quick end should they drink the blood with a person's alcohol past a certain limit. It appears like with Gleason, the level after only 2 pints was low enough that it did not affect the larger grabber. But with Dr. Smith, who was well beyond 2 pints, the creature could literally smell him as he exuded alcohol from his pores, and that was picked up by the chemoreceptors of the grabber. And just like with most things concerning allergic reactions, your body actually typically has a threshold of what it can deal with versus what it can't deal with. So what does this all mean? Well, during an alien invasion, best thing you could do is head to the Winchester, grab a pint, and wait for all this to blow over.